The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has a clear element which sets it apart from any other title, which is the strongly visible sense of difficulty and progression. The game starts you off with limited supplies and a general idea of where to go with a perilous world opposing you, filled with dangerous enemies and treacherous terrain. But what you know is how you can get stronger. As you obtain and learn to use better equipment and increase your health and stamina, you're able to take on more of these enemies and combat becomes easier and more satisfying, as you're able to take down foes who previously posed a great threat. This progression enhances the experience and makes the challenges in exploring, growing and surviving all the more rewarding. I'm PrimeHylian, and this is how Breath of the Wild incorporates challenge and progression. Breath of the Wild's challenge is one of its more prominent features, and this is incorporated into many different elements of the game. The world features a variety of higher challenge creatures that roam certain areas that the player may come across, such as guardian stalkers, Lynels, wizrobes, and strong bokoblin camps. Along with these are particular environments which pose danger, like areas of cold, heat, storms, high falls, and more. These inherently oppose the player's ability to explore, and for the first portion of the game present high levels of challenge to a new player. For example, some creatures do high damage or have a particular weakness the player needs to exploit, which they might not have the tools for. To counter this, the game presents the player with three elements of progression: growth, equipment, and experience. Let's start with growth. Growth is the player's increase in health, stamina, and carrying capacity throughout the game. You start out with a very minimal amount of these elements, however you're shown how to increase these very early on, and you're also given the tools you need to achieve this. In the Great Plateau, you complete the amount of shrines necessary to upgrade health or stamina, and when you get to exploring the world, you see these shrines littered throughout. And on your way to Kakariko Village, you're shown how to increase your inventory space using Korok seeds. From here, the player realizes some obvious logic. I just need so many of these items and I can improve my health, stamina, and carrying capacity. Since their growth and progression isn't limited by selected functional items or equipment like in previous installments, their growth is entirely determined by their own skill and drive. This gives that feeling of excitement for whenever they're able to advance these elements, to be that bit stronger or to climb that extra bit further. This gives the player incentive to explore the world to find shrines and Koroks, and therefore allows the player to improve different elements that benefit their own playstyle when dealing with the world's challenges. If they're confident in their ability to avoid attacks and want to improve their climbing ability, they can do so. If they value carrying more swords over bows, they're able to increase their carrying capacities at different rates. The game leaves it with the player to choose how they want to progress. And with this progression, common foes present less and less difficulty. But with the more expansive areas, there are more enemies which are tougher to defeat and/or require more specialized damage to assist in taking down. This is where the game's second element comes into play: equipment. The player will often find certain types of weapons which have different functionality. The faster, longer range weapons such as spears, the close range but shield paired weapons like swords, and the heavy, slow but hard-hitting weapons such as hammers or clubs. Not only does this work to the player's liking and playstyle, but also presents him with resourceful conflict. This is a common element of resource management, most commonly seen in genres like survival horror. In Breath of the Wild, it mainly serves as a function to challenge the player. They must decide on what they need and what they can spare due to their limited carrying capacity, and whether they should use certain equipment with risk of it breaking. They have to decide on what functions they value, for example speed, use of a shield, or raw damage, and how much of each they're willing to take. What to take and what to sacrifice. And just because they might have potent weapons doesn't mean they can use them to make every combat scenario easy. Equipment has limited durability, and the most effective types are often rare and scarce. And not only that, but they can only carry so many of these weapons. The player will have to decide on whether a particular enemy is worth using their better equipment against, or if they should save it for a more prominent situation. With this mindset, even the more common fights can pose a threat or challenge for a good portion of the game's playthrough. And if they don't effectively manage their inventory, such as using their best weapons against every enemy, they'll be punished and caught unprepared for tough situations. There are also items with different types of damage, and this leads on to particular enemies which have specific vulnerabilities. These enemies, which may pose significant challenge normally, can be dispatched much easier and quicker by exploiting their weakness. A perfect example of this are guardian stalkers. Guardians are incredibly powerful enemies which roam the world. They have incredibly high perception and are extremely resistant to most types of weapons, and weaker weapons simply won't work against them. But once the player obtains a particular type of weapon, they're able to more effectively take them down. And to build these weapons, which are rather expensive as is, also require parts from Guardians. So, based on the logic stated earlier, they won't use them unless they encounter one. And not only can they fight them, but they may even seek them out for the parts they drop. This is a complete 180 on how the player reacts to this type of enemy, all because of the equipment they carry. This topic also involves Breath of the Wild's third element, experience. This element isn't quite as visible as equipment or growth, but is equally as present. This occurs throughout the course of the game, as the player will learn tactics and strategies to handle particular situations, and most of these are learned through experimentation and trial and error. When they start off, they are very weak and vulnerable, and practically every enemy will pose a threat to the inexperienced player. So, the player will naturally learn the most resourceful methods of confrontation in order to stay alive and not waste equipment. They will also learn which weapons they can use all the time and which they should save, and when combat is best avoided altogether. Experience incorporates both equipment and growth. They'll learn the ways to approach and take down particular enemies, what weapons to use, elixirs and food to make, and the weak points and attack patterns to look for. This applies to both smaller common enemies like Lizalfos and the larger enemies like Lynels. Every enemy can become a breeze to defeat with the right equipment and knowledge of their attack patterns, which makes the player feel like they've become so much stronger, taking down these foes with minimal effort who previously posed a great threat to them. This is how odds and difficulty become less skewed as the player becomes more experienced. If the player is highly skilled and knowledgeable, they may not need so much high-level equipment in certain enemy encounters, just because they know what to do and are skilled enough to land the right hits or avoid certain attacks. The game is also designed with experimentation in mind, and this is commonly where alternative methods are incorporated into the game. The player doesn't always have to charge in risking death or damaging their weapons, as many bokoblin camps and other enemy environments usually have an exploit incorporated that the player can use if they're creative enough to find it. In the starting areas, this is made more obvious to encourage the player to try it out, such as nearby boulders or beehives. This isn't just limited to attacking enemies either. Chests in difficult locations and points of interest in difficult terrain can also encourage alternate methods of approach. This is why the hard mode DLC is catered to the very experienced players, since many of the changes involve challenging the knowledge they currently have. For example, enemies are smarter and have different behavioral patterns. In the starting area features a Lynel, one of the strongest enemies, where you only have extremely minimal equipment to fight it. This would be ludicrous if the player had no knowledge of the game, but since they do, it's not so impossible. Breath of the Wild's difficulty is clearly visible, and a new player will find it rather challenging right out of the first area. But the game provides many areas of growth and room for experimentation, allowing the player to get stronger at their own pace and learning the best strategies to utilize the tools at their disposal. And with this, they will learn the game their own way, and will get stronger through equipment and a sense of wit. It's the kind of growth you can't categorize by experience points, as it's almost entirely determined by the player's own experimentation and ability to apply what they've experienced to situations they encounter. This makes Breath of the Wild's playthrough more engaging and satisfying as the player gets stronger and is able to take on the expansive and dangerous world in the game, but through their own merits and growth. This is how Breath of the Wild utilizes challenge and progression.